Gnaeus Pompey can be confidently called one of the most brilliant generals and political figures of ancient Rome. The name of Pompey, called the Great at a very young age, has previously been seen in our videos. It was he who lost a long and bloody war for power with Caesar, after which he was treacherously killed while trying to escape to Egypt. His genealogical tree goes back to a plebeian family from the Adriatic coast, which over the years joined the privileged class of horsemen. The first known representative of the dynasty, Quintus Pompey, was a consul. Gnaeus Pompey's grandfather Sextus fought with the Celts in Macedonia. His father was a general and consul. From an early age Pompey studied in Rome, and in the year of his father's consulship, at the height of the war with the Italic tribes, was in a military camp. At the time of the siege of Ascalus, young Pompey was already present at the council of war. When infighting broke out, the Pompeian family supported Strabo. Despite the political success of his father, after his death Gnaeus lost his chances for political patronage of noble families and appropriate assistance in building a future career. Moreover, the Pompeian house in Rome was plundered because of Strabo's unpopularity, and Gnaeus himself was accused of embezzling the military booty taken at Ascula. From the charges he was saved by protectionism, for the son of the former consul interceded, and the chairman of the court Publius Antistius even decided to breed with Pompey, giving him his daughter. This marriage finally reconciled Gnaeus Pompey with the Roman nobility and allowed him to return to politics. Meanwhile, in Rome itself was an ongoing struggle for power. When Lucius Cornelius Sulla made peace with Mithridates VI and headed for the Eternal City, Pompey went to his native estate in Pydna, hoping to gather an army and join the future dictator. Gnaeus Pompey recruited an entire legion from veterans of Strabo's army and entered the civil war, where he discovered his talent as a commander. Sulla solemnly welcomed the young Pompey, barely 22 years old, into the ranks of his supporters. While Sulla himself headed towards Rome, Gnaeus continued to recruit legions in Pydna, and then moved to Cisalpine Gaul to fight with consul Carbon. They were not destined to meet. When Sulla besieged the consul and Marian leader Gaius Maria the Younger, Carbon rushed to rescue his ally, and Sulla ordered Pompey to move directly on Rome. After the capture of Rome and the proclamation of Sulla, dictator Pompey at the head of 6 legions and 900 ships went to pacify the remnants of the followers of Mary in Sicily, Sardinia and Africa. Avoiding major battles, he captured Carbonus, who had fled earlier, and executed him. The execution stunned the Romans. The young general Gnaeus Pompey, not appointed senator and not announced to the triumph, allowed himself to execute a Roman citizen, 3 times consul of the Republic, unheard of audacity. Subsequently, orators wishing to denounce Gnaeus during public speeches, repeatedly referred to this story. The next milestone in the military career of Pompey was a campaign in Africa, where the Marians gathered an army of 27,000 people and secured the support of the Numidian king Jarba. However, among the ruins of the once majestic Carthage, where there was already spilled not a little Roman blood, Pompey still did not hold a single serious battle. He quickly defeated the army of Gnaeus Domitius Agenobarbus and executed the captured Jarba. But such a rapid rise of Gnaeus Pompey alarmed Sulla. The dictator ordered the commander to disband his troops and return to Rome, to which Pompey refused and demanded a triumph. Of course, to demand a triumph for victory in the civil war of Rome, that is, over the Romans, was even more audacity than the execution of Carbon, because the formal reason for the triumph was the victory over the Numidian king. In addition to the right to triumph, Gnaeus Pompey received the nickname Magnus, Great, and he was barely 25 years old by this time. Soon Sulla happy withdrew from business, retiring to a country villa, where he died. A year before his death, Pompey supported Marcus Aemilius Lepidus in the consular elections, which Sulla was extremely dissatisfied, and was right. When Lepidus went to suppress the rebellion in Etruria, he himself took the side of the rebels and even led them. To suppress the rebellion, the Senate, of course, sent the great Pompey, empowered with the authority of propraetor. Gnaeus decided to isolate the hotbed of rebellion in Etruria, for which he besieged Marcus Junius Brutus in Modena. Lepidus took advantage of the fact that Pompey's army was north of him, and attacked Rome, however, without success. The defenders of the city were victorious. Lepidus and his army fled to Sardinia, where he soon died. However, the civil war in the Republic did not subside. The followers of Maria fled to Spain, where they joined the army of Sertorius. The Sertorian War. The Roman Senate has repeatedly faced the fact that commanders, taking advantage of the enormous authority of their troops, refused to obey orders from the capital. For examples do not have to go far. Gnaeus Pompey did not obey the dictator Sulla, Gaius Julius Caesar, the Senate. The same story happened with the commander Quintus Sertorius, who settled in Spain and started a war against Rome. Quintus Sertorius distinguished himself in battles with the Cimbrians, Teutons. During the war with the Italic tribes commanded the army, was awarded the triumph. In the civil war supported Maria and fled Rome with the arrival of Sulla. Therefore, it is not surprising that the former army Lepidus was met with favor. The Marian War with Sullan Rome was in full swing. Moreover, Sertorius by that time went to the side of the rebellious Spaniards, organized and mouthed their detachments and successfully crushed all the Republican legions sent to suppress this movement. To pursue the Marians, Pompey gathered an army and moved into Spain through Narbonne, Gaul. In the summer of 77, Gnaeus pacified the rebellious Gallic tribes, and in 76 entered the Pyrenees. The first clash between the Spaniards and Pompey's legions occurred at the town of Lavron, which remained loyal to the Republic. Quintus Sertorius laid siege to the strategically important city. Pompey threw his forces into lifting the siege. To the great surprise of the Romans, in this seemingly win-win situation, Pompey the Great was defeated. Large forces of Sertorius was in the rear of the Republican legions and surrounded them. And Pompey did not dare to make any attempts to break through from the encirclement and for a long time inactive. As a result, the Romans lost 10,000 legionaries, and Pompey for the first time showed indecision, which ruined him many years later in the war with Caesar. The campaign of 75 years was more successful for the young commander. Pompey defeated the troops of Gaius Gerenius and Marcus Perperna, recaptured Valencia. However, Sertorius again took the upper hand over Pompey, this time in the Battle of the River Hucar. According to contemporaries, Pompey fled the battlefield, abandoning his horse in precious harness. Only approached the next day the army of Metellus, the second commander of the Republic, prevented Sertorius to consolidate success. The rebels retreated to Sigüenza and decided to lure the Roman legions there. This time Sertorius attacked the Romans together with the army of Perperna, and his wing fought against Pompey, and the detachment of Perperna, against Metellus. The outcome of the battle was ambiguous. On the one hand, Sertorius defeated the great Pompey, for the third time. But on the other wing, Metellus won. The rebels retreated to the fortress of Clunia, which the Republicans could not take by storm, and did not risk a siege, fearing the approach of Spanish reinforcements. By the following year, both sides began to suffer from supply problems and irregular payment of salaries to the legionaries. Poor harvests and the complete devastation of Spanish lands only made matters worse. To enter the field battles with the Spaniards, Sertoria Pompey henceforth did not dare, because he understood perfectly well that if the series of defeats continued, the Senate can recall him to Italy, depriving him of all posts. Pompey changed tactics, and instead of imposing the enemy fighting began to destroy strongholds and cities of the rebels. It is not known how long the confrontation between Pompey and Sertorius would have lasted, but the conspirators at the rebel headquarters killed their commander. Upon learning of Sertorius's death, Metellus and Pompey rushed to the offensive. While Metellus and his army went to far Spain, Pompey the Great rehabilitated himself in the eyes of the Senate by defeating the rebels and executing Perperna. Victory in the Sertorian War, especially considering that Sertorius was many times superior to the enemy in experience and military skill, allowed Pompey to strengthen his influence in Rome and significantly increase public support. This was just the beginning of Pompey's political and military path, and there were many truly great victories and equally crushing defeats ahead of him. Crassus and Pompey against Spartacus. The next act of the Roman Revolution was started not by a free man but by a slave. Lentulus Badiatus kept a gladiatorial school at Capua. Slaves and convicted criminals who were trained to fight wild animals or each other to the death in public arenas or private homes. 200 of them tried to escape. 77 succeeded, took up arms and occupied one of the slopes of Vesuvius, whence they began to raid the surrounding towns in search of food. They chose the Thracian Spartacus as their leader. Spartacus urged the Italian slaves to revolt, and soon he had 70,000 fighters under his command who wanted freedom and revenge. He taught them to make weapons and fight in such an organized and disciplined manner that for several years they were able to outnumber any enemy who opposed them. Spartacus' victories filled the Italian rich with terror, and the slaves with hope. So many people wanted to join his army that, having brought its number to 120,000 people, he stopped accepting new recruits. Realizing that it would be difficult for him to take care of such a mass of people, Spartacus marched at the head of his troops towards the Alps, intending to disband the soldiers at home, if he manages to cross the mountains. However, his supporters did not share the sensitivity and peacefulness of his leader opposed to the execution of his plans. They began to plunder the cities of northern Italy. The Senate now sent against the rebels both consuls, with whom marched the strongest armies. One of them encountered a unit, retired from Spartacus, and defeated him. The other attacked the main forces of the rebels and was defeated. Moving again towards the Alps, Spartacus met a third army, led by Cassius, and after this meeting its numbers were greatly reduced. Convinced that the way is blocked by new legions, Spartacus turned south and went to Rome. Half of the Italian slaves were ready to support the rebellion, and in the capital no one would have predicted when the revolution would break out in his own home. All this prosperous society, which had lived off the splendid things that would have been impossible without the institution of slavery, shuddered at the thought that it might lose everything it had: dominion, property, life. Senators and millionaires cried out that a commander better than the previous ones was needed. Few offered their services, as the Romans were intimidated by this unusual new enemy. Finally, the main contender for command was Crassus, and it was he who led the 40,000th army. Many representatives of the nobility, not yet completely forgotten about the traditions of their class, joined its ranks as volunteers. Realizing that he was opposed by the entire republic and that his men would never be able to rule the state or even a single capital, Spartacus passed by and moved south until he came to Turea, passing through all of Italy in the hope that he would be able to ferry the army to Sicily or Africa. For the third year he successfully repelled all attacks. But even here his impatient army went out of obedience and began to plunder, breaking into neighboring cities. Crassus came upon a large band of such marauders and slaughtered it, though the slaves fought to the last drop of blood. Meanwhile, the legions of Gnaeus Pompey the Great, returning from Spain, were sent to reinforce Crassus' army. Desperate to defeat such large forces, Spartacus rushed into battle with the legions of Crassus and met death by crashing into the thick of the enemy. 2 centurions fell dead at his feet. Plunged to the ground and unable to rise, he continued to slaughter his opponents on his knees. Eventually his body was so chopped up that he could not be found among the dead. The vast majority of Spartacus' supporters died with him. Some managed to escape. They were hunted through the forests of Italy. 6,000 prisoners were crucified along the Appian Way between Capua and Rome. Their decaying bodies were left to hang there for many months, for the master's comfort, for the slaves' edification. When Crassus and Pompey returned from this campaign, they did not, as the Senate desired and the law required, disband or disarm their troops at the city gates. They camped outside the city walls, then asked permission to participate in the consular elections while remaining outside the city, a new violation of every conceivable rule. On top of all this, Pompey demanded land for his soldiers and a triumph for himself. The Senate refused, hoping to pit the commanders against each other, but Crassus and Pompey decided to act together, made an unexpected alliance with the populares and horsemen, and, thanks to generous handouts, were elected consuls. Pompey became one of the leading political figures in Rome.